Hello everyone, this is RaySpace and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox in Kerbal Space Program 1.12. In my most recent video on the channel, I posted the first video in the TPAA Future History sequence where the H3 launcher from Japan launches a probe to the moon. And the H3 launcher is where things start out for the TPAA timeline. But we eventually get the Kasei rocket, which I have used in many videos prior. And the Kasei rocket has its own engines. It wasn't originally, even though Kasei is the Japanese word for Mars, it wasn't originally meant to use Japanese engines. However, now it is integrated into the timeline. And so the logical thing would be to have the engines for the H3 be used on the Kasei rocket initially before the more advanced engines, the larger engines, which have 4,000 kilonewtons of thrust, get introduced. And so I want to test what the capacity of the Kasei rocket is with LE-9 engines, the ones from the H3 rocket. And right now I've placed 70 tons on the top, and we'll see if it works out. We have a healthy amount of delta V, 9,657, and I've called this the H4. And then the one with the upgraded engines, the way the Kasei rocket normally is going to be called the H4A. This is a 8.4 meter diameter rocket, so it's exactly the same as SLS. And the difference is that it has a much bigger second stage with much more thrust. For the second stage, we have two LE-9 engines. We would need a vacuum version of these, and we are expecting 440 seconds of ISP for those vacuum versions. And in this case, I've just used the same model as the LE-9 model from the Japanese launcher pack. And the total mass here you can see is 5.6 tons, so fairly hefty. Should be reasonably accurate. They would have to adapt it for launching or lighting midair as opposed to lighting on the ground, but I think that should be possible. Hopefully that's less of a trouble than actually making this rocket in general. And then down below we have 12 of the LE-9 engines. Now I couldn't use the ones from the Japanese launcher pack because they have that mount on, and so they are each individual instead, and they're each 2.4 tons. That's what it seemed to be, and they have 426 seconds of ISP and the normal vacuum thrust there. So 12 of those, so 12 on the first stage, 2 on the second stage is how we have it set up. And as a result, we have a fairly low thrust weight ratio. This is actually not fully fueled. You can see it still has about 1/5 of its capacity available. So we're at 80% of the actual use of that tank. It would only be able to get full use if we have the larger engines at the bottom, and it would have 5 of those. So this is the 8.4 meter version. The Kasei rocket also has the Kasei 2, which is 10.1. That's Saturn V diameter, but this is smaller. So we have 70 tons on it. Let's see if it can launch 70 tons to orbit. I'll just use ascent guidance and keep it simple. Now in the TPAA Future History, the H3 rocket is still launched at Tanegashima, but the Kasei rocket is always launched at Tampico, of course. And here we are at Tampico. And I'm going to just go ahead and engage autopilot. I've tweaked the booster pitch start time, which is 100 meters per second, and the rate, in the hopes that it can adjust for the fact that we only have 1.17 thrust weight ratio at the start. So yeah, let's go. 12 LE-9 engines, not the biggest cluster ever, obviously. Hopefully sensible. They are clusterable. They have 3 max on the H3 rocket. Fairly close together. Okay, we are starting to turn. Well, the indicator here has turned negative, so we might not have enough delta V for the 70 tons, it turns out. Now the Kasei rocket normally has, or often has, methane oxygen boosters, but those were the Sagitta rocket boosters, so they were the first stage of a different rocket, the Sagitta rocket. And I think in order to... Whoa, that's a turn. I don't like when it turns like that. Perhaps I have to increase the booster pitch rate then. But in order to keep in line with the whole idea of the TPAA future history timeline and the countries involved, I think I might turn them into neutron rocket boosters. I've already tested that out once, though those neutron boosters were a little bit unsuited in shape, but I wanted to keep them as close to the original neutron rocket as possible, so we might see neutrons on the side of this. At least they'll be recoverable like that, potentially. So we'll have recoverable boosters in the form of neutrons, which are also methane and oxygen, and we'll see what kind of capacity I get out of that, and with the LE-9s, and then maybe I'll have more differently shaped neutrons in the future. More optimally shaped. We're not too far off. We're short about 150. And we'll see how this goes. I doubt it can make up for all of that, but we'll see. So, 2 LE-9s here. Still has to keep some pitch now, so I don't know why it did that sudden turn. Sent guidance, I don't know if it's all it's cracked up to be, honestly. But yes, New Zealand is a TPAA country, so it's part of the future history. I do eventually toss in India, even though it's not part of the CPTPP agreement, and does not seem to want to be part of that, so... eventually there is an alliance there. And broadly speaking, these are the countries other than China, Russia, the United States, and the European Union trying to do stuff. But actually, the United Kingdom is part of the CPTPP, so I think it's the only European country that is. And of course, the United Kingdom has a fraught history with whether it's European or not, but anyway. It is technically part of the European Space Agency, so there is overlap there. Okay, well, we are short. We are about 140 meters per second short. Let me see what we can do about that. We'll have to reduce the payload is all I can think of. The other thing would be to reduce the amount of fuel in the first stage in the hope that we get more thrust-to-weight ratio. You know, exchange delta V for thrust-to-weight ratio in the hope that we don't get as much drag. But I think we'll just keep it to 1.16 here. So we need about 100 more. Let's just try 66 tons then. It seems about right. We've got full-sized fairings, so I could obviously get more by just having smaller fairings, but then most of our payloads will be larger than this, so might as well go with this. The rocket actually weighs less on the pad than the New Glenn rocket, but it's physically larger in diameter and probably in height because it's fully hydrolox instead of a Meflox first stage and then hydrolox second stage. Well, it seemed like we could do with higher booster pitch rate, but only as long as its ending pitch stays okay. Here we go again. Can't do 66 tons. This is from the get-go more low Earth orbit optimized than SLS's. SLS is definitely meant for the moon and beyond. This does have better capability to low Earth orbit. Alright, staging. And I do stage the fairings at the same time. We're cutting it close here. We've got 25 to spare, it says. Alright, well, it looks like we're going to get to orbit with this load, so without the fancier engines and without the first stage fully fueled, the version with the LE-9 engines, slightly modified in the case of the vacuum ones, can get 66 tons to low Earth orbit. Maybe a little bit more, but I don't want to push that. We probably need some margin in there. But yeah, 66 tons. It's not the hugest margin over New Glenn, but it's pretty good. And of course, then we can add boosters to get more. And then eventually the better engines to push it to its limits. Alright, there is orbit. About 56 left. And I just wanted to introduce this because it will appear in the TPAA future history sort of as a given. In other words, I'm not going to do a whole lot of explaining of it. So with this quick rocket test carrying 66 tons to low Earth orbit, potentially maybe 30 tons to the moon, something like that, I'll say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.